Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How Have Communities Tackled Vacant and Derelict Land? This is part of our ongoing Land at Lunch series of conversational briefings which are open to all. We will definitely finish no later than 12:45 today. Today, I'm joined by Lisa Busby, who's the Land Commission's Training Coordinator. Hi, Lisa. And we're also joined by Lucy Gillie, General Manager at South Seeds in Glasgow. Hi, Lucy. And last but definitely not least, we have Bill Anderson, who's the Community Partnership and Project Manager at ONESPACE in Carluke. So I'll just briefly run through the format of today's webinar. Lisa will introduce the session and also talk a little bit about the Land Commission's work on vacant and derelict land reuse. The main part of the session, we will then hear from Lucy and Bill, talking about their projects, outlining some of the challenges they faced, but also lessons learned and positive outcomes. And we'll then have a short question and answer session, which I'll do my best to chair. So please feel free to post any questions or thoughts on either the discussion box or the question and answer box, and I'll keep an eye on those throughout the presentation. But before I hand over to Lisa, I'm just going to say a little bit to introduce the Land Commission and our work on the Good Practice Programme. We're a relatively small organisation. We're steered by 5 commissioners and there's 17 staff who work at the Commission. We were set up in 2017 following an act of the Scottish Parliament. We're fully funded by Scottish Government, but we're an independent agency. We do a mix of work, so we carry out quite a lot of research on better land use and innovation. We also provide advice to the Scottish Government on legislation and policy. And finally, we run quite an extensive good practice programme. So this programme is underpinned by the Scottish Parliament's Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, which sets out expectations from people who own or land or manage land, and it's really around good practice, around community engagement and land use. Now, the programme, I won't say too much about it. If you're interested, you could find out more from our website. We've developed tools and guidance to help with better land use and better land stewardship. But we also run a series of training events, which Lisa leads, and the Good Practice team also does work on casework and case studies. That's enough from me. I'll now hand over to Lisa.
Thanks, David. And hello, everyone. Are you okay to stop sharing your screen, David? So while David does that, thank you very much. I just want to outline a few pieces of information and housekeeping before we start. So as you've probably seen from our holding slide and the messages in the chat, today's webinar is recorded, including the chat and the Q&A function. Information on how the recording is used and our full privacy policy are in the chat now. Everyone's camera and mic today are off by default, but we welcome your questions in the Q&A box and comments in the chat. Questions and comments in the Q&A box are anonymous if you want them to be, but your screen name's always visible in the chat, so that's worth remembering. In today's session, we have the option for you to turn on closed captions or subtitles, and this function is enabled using the CC button on the control panel at the bottom of your screen. We'd flag that these captions are auto-generated, so there may be inaccuracies out of our control. Apologies for that if that is the case. We're going to be collating some feedback throughout the session in the form of 2 short Zoom polls, and we're really grateful for your input into these. The polls are anonymous. We don't share the answers to the entire group. And as I said, information on how that data is used, I've already popped into the chat. We're going to flag some resources today as we go through, and I'm going to be doing my best to put them in the chat as we go along. So you can access those using those live links if they're of interest to you or of relevance to you straight away. But we do collate all the tools and all the links and all the web pages on a single resources page, and I will share that at the end of the webinar. So if you want to just grab everything in one place, that will be collated for you, and I will share that at the end. If you've got any questions at all on this housekeeping, please do put them into the chat. But before we get started on the main part of the session, I'd just like to launch a really quick poll to get a sense of who's in the room today. So let me do that. So hopefully you can now see a box that's popped up on your screen. There are 4 questions, many of them just multiple choice. Great, I can see some people have already started. Yeah, so if you could just scroll through those, give us a sense of who's in the room today. This really helps us understand our audience and plan future events. So I'll give you a few moments to do that while I be quiet. And yeah, thank you very much. Many thanks everyone for taking part in that. It really does help us. And as I said, we'll be doing another poll at the end of the session today. Okay, so before I welcome our guests to talk about their projects, I just want to give you a very brief overview to the Commission's work on tackling vacant and derelict land. Scotland has almost 11,000 hectares of vacant and derelict land, and the legacy of our industrial past means that almost 1/3 of Scotland's population lives within 500 metres of a derelict site. In areas or communities facing deprivation, this figure actually rises to 55%. The consequences of these sites are significant. They blight communities, they harm well-being, they limit opportunities, but they could be so much more. And they could help solve some of our society's biggest challenges. Bringing abandoned and unloved urban places back into productive use could help us tackle climate change, improve health and well-being, create more resilient communities, and rebuild our economy in a way that helps everyone achieve their full potential. Just as some examples, transforming sites allows for the potential to build new homes, to limit urban sprawl and protect our green spaces, revitalise our town centres. It can provide new allotments in city farms, making it easier for people to choose fresh, seasonal, locally grown food. It can create new parks and green spaces, great for physical and mental well-being and for biodiversity. It can attract new investment to create new jobs and wealth locally, and it can generate renewable energy, helping to tackle fuel poverty. So back in 2018, the Scottish Land Commission and SEPA established a national task force to help realise this opportunity. The Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force brought together senior representatives from around 30 businesses, public bodies and third sector organisations who spent 2 years working to transform the existing approach to bringing vacant and derelict land back into productive use. The task force made a series of recommendations to Scottish Government and created an interactive map of long-term derelict urban sites, or DUSTIES. This map includes ownership details, it includes opportunities for reuse, and also where there's some activity already underway. We also created and collated many resources and case studies, and these real-world projects and helpful tools will be the focus of our 2 Land at Lunch sessions today and in 2 weeks' time. And as we go through the session today, I'm going to be posting some links to some of those resources and some of that work that's already been done, as well as links to the 2 projects that Lucy and Bill are going to talk about today. So as I said, today's session, we're going to hear firsthand from community groups and projects that have been successful in transforming vacant and derelict land. And we're going to give you the chance to ask questions directly and learn from their experience. First of all, we're going to hear from Lucy Gillie at South Seeds, and then from Bill Anderson at the Carluke High Mill Project. We would ask that people do post their questions into the chat, into the Q&A, but we will answer all those questions in one place at the end when we have our panel discussion and time for questions. So first of all, I'm really pleased to introduce Lucy Gillie, General Manager at South Seeds, a community organisation based in Glasgow, to talk about their community garden project, the Croft. So over to you, Lucy.
Thanks. And can you just confirm the time that I have?
Yes, of course, for about 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Okay. So here I'm Lucy Gillie and I work at South Seeds. I'm the manager there. We've been going for 11 years. We're a community organisation in the south side of Glasgow, which is the Govan Hill area. It's quite a mixed area, and it also spreads into Pollock Shields and Mount Florida. I think you'll find your presentation is skipping ahead. we support residents to live more sustainable lives. And we have an energy program, we have a tool library, there's a lot of different projects we have. One of our projects is enabling residents to learn how to grow vegetables and leafy greens. I'm not really including fruits there because fruits are harder to grow and takes longer to learn. But we had the opportunity to take over a tennis court. It's actually 2 tennis courts which were disused and vacant for many, many years, over 10 years, and they belonged to a bowling and tennis club. And they hadn't used the tennis courts for ages, but this all happened in the year that Andy Murray was about to win Wimbledon. So I was quite worried there would be a resurgence in tennis, but there wasn't really a resurgence in tennis on the ground. And the bowling club still wanted to rent us these tennis courts. We mended the fence, which they were delighted with. I got some money from the local authority, a very small grant of about £3,000 to mend the fence, and that immediately stopped the antisocial behaviour. We cleared up the site with volunteers. We picked up all the hypodermic needles. We cleared the site of saplings that were growing through the kind of red blaze, and then we built these raised beds that you can see the photo on the left, and that's us. Those raised beds, I don't know if you can see, they're upside down because they've got membrane being stapled onto them, and then we flip them over and we fill them with compost. So we put in about 24 of those raised beds in about 2015, and it's only now, which 2023, that we're starting to replace those. So the wood has lasted an awful long time, and we're just replacing them about 5 or 7 beds per year, so it's not very costly at all. And what happens at the Croft Community Garden, and the reason we put raised beds in, is because the soil in Glasgow is generally contaminated because so much building waste was used as sort of infill, and a lot of the building waste had chromium in it, and it's impossible to do the detailed tests. It's so expensive. It's actually cheaper to build raised growing beds, so that's what we did. And then what we do is we invite people to apply to adopt a raised growing bed for a growing season. And we consider the growing season in Glasgow to start at the end of March, beginning of April, and finish October. Sometimes it goes into November if we're lucky. And so at the moment, we have applications open for people to adopt one of the 24 raised beds. And the criteria is that you need to live within a 20-minute walk, and you need to live in a flat, not a house. And then there's some other questions about what you would like to do with the bed, and a few other things as well. And then what happens is we have a panel of people who select 24 people, and then we have a reserve list as well. And in the other picture, you can see Eric, our expert gardener, he conducts sessions, and people have to be inducted onto their raised bed so that they understand that they should be growing without chemicals, and what they can expect from the experience. So people have to say that they can come to the induction sessions before they have to say that on the application form. If you could move to the next slide, please. So here we are. This is the Croft in action. It is a place where you can see on the left where people can grow, and they are supported to grow during the season one year we had 3 people had babies in the same summer, which was great. They were able to get to know each other, and it's great. It mixes people up because people were in a mixed tenure area here, but it mixes people up again because people might have live in a privately rented flat, and the person, their raised bed neighbour to the left, might be in social housing, and their raised bed neighbour to the right might be an owner occupier. But people get to meet people from nearby streets, and it builds a community every year of growers. It's also a space, as you can see, where we can hold events. We've had a lot of musical stuff down there, competitions and harvest festivals. So it's been a brilliant space. We've got this covered area, as you can see, where people can shelter if it's drizzling. So if you go down there and it starts to drizzle, you can shelter, and then you don't have to whiz off home. And you can see we've also installed a solar panel in the picture on the left. It's not connected to the grid, but it does run to the sheltered area, and there's some lights there, and somewhere where you can plug in a 3-pin plug. So that is the Croft. We have transformed it from an antisocial behaviour, an area of antisocial behaviour that the bowling club was a real problem for the bowling club. And now we pay rent to the bowling club, and we keep the area free of antisocial behaviour. So that is the Croft Community Garden. It's also worth saying that it's really valuable space because it's such a sanctuary, and it's in one of the most densely populated areas in Scotland, or close to Govan Hill, which is the most densely populated area of Scotland. So in Govan Hill, many tenement flats don't have front gardens. They're just hard up to the street. So it's fantastic to have this space that people can go to when they adopt a raised bed. But if you have any questions, let me know. That's a brief overview, and we'll talk about, we'll answer those at the end.
Thanks so much, Lucy, for telling us the story of the Croft. That's fantastic. I just wondered before we hand over to Bill, if there are any top tips or any kind of key messages you would share about for other people who might be wanting to transform a piece of vacant or derelict land. Yeah, what would your top tips be for or overcoming some of those challenges? That's not too big a question for right now.
No, it's a good question. I would say that because there's been a lot of talk about ownership of land, for example, islands buying themselves out and all that kind of stuff, which is amazing and fantastic. I think the Croft is a really good example of, you don't have to get hung up on ownership. You can just have an agreement, rent, and get going. And it means that you save years and years and years of trying to gain ownership. I mean, we've had nearly 10 years growing at the Croft, which is fantastic. And it could have taken us 5 years to gain ownership if we'd gone for like a community buyout or something like that. I don't know. So it's a really good example of just getting going. And in the cities, land often belongs to someone, and you can contact them and find out if they want to work together with you. And the other thing is that we don't feel that people have to be there all year round. In the winter, we make sure people don't have access to the Croft, and we change the code every year so that to keep it safe, so that the people who were there the previous year aren't suspects if there's a break-in the next year. So we're constantly trying to make the experience work for everyone, and make sure that the Croft isn't a liability in any way.
Thanks, Lucy. That's fantastic to hear about being able to do something without owning the land, and I'm sure that'll come up in our question and answer session later. But yes, thank you so much. And I'm now going to bring in Bill Anderson. Bill, if you're ready, the Community Partnership and Project Manager at ONESPACE Community Hub in Carluke. And Bill's going to talk to us about the Carluke High Mill Project.
Thanks, Lisa. David, go on and shoot to the first slide, please. The second slide even. I guess one of the reasons why I'm putting this up is this is the whole site at Carluke High Mill. Oops. And the rationale for this slide is quite simple. If you look to the bottom right hand corner, there's a series of buildings there that are our heritage element of this site. So what used to be a windmill will be all sorts of interpretation areas, and we'll talk a little bit more detail on that. But I think what was important was to show you that those buildings form only a tiny bit of this 1.2 acre site that used to be a market garden. And the reason for explaining it that way is it's quite simple, is for the last 40 years, the communities in Carluke, particular elements of the community, were fixated on the buildings. So they wanted the buildings bought from a private owner. The whole site was owned by a private owner, and they were concentrating on plans for the buildings. They were concentrating on interpretation and all the things that people plan to do with physical entities, buildings, walls, that sort of thing. And so about 5 or 6 years ago, the silly people at Carluke Development Trust decided to employ me. And one of the first things that I looked at was that there was a huge resource, untapped resource, in the remainder of the site. So we literally used the site, the land, as the catalyst for getting the buildings bought. And I keep telling people this, that it was the most expensive acre of land that I've ever dealt with. The total site cost was 241,000, of which those buildings at the bottom right-hand corner equated to £1,000 of that amount. So when we talked to the Scottish Land Fund, we didn't concentrate the buildings, we concentrated the land. And so if I'll quickly give you a tour around it, and then we'll talk about some specifics around buildings. But the entrance is on your left-hand side, and that's a new road that we sourced funding from vacant and derelict land. We put in all of the drainage required, but all of the buildings, the site, all of the services required, power, everything that it requires across the site. If you go up that hill, you come to where our mechanical and engineering workshops will be, because we've got the mill machinery that we're using again as a catalyst to deliver training and learning opportunities. To the right-hand side, top right-hand side, where you've got some trees and 2 rectangles. Those 2 rectangles are commercial polytunnels, 30 feet long, 10 feet, 12 feet wide. Those trees are a mini orchard that are there. Across from those 2 polytunnels is our growing area, which has a combination of land and also raised beds, similar to South Seeds. But the rationale for our raised beds is because it was a market garden. The land up there and the soil up there is fantastic. But we wanted to raise some beds up so that people with accessibility requirements could more easily access growing areas. We'll come back to the buildings in a minute. If you then go round the back of the buildings to where those trees are, and then there's a house. If you then walk further down on the right-hand side is our other growing and learning garden, which has our other orchards. And then in there is a place where people can sit on benches with parasols. And across from that huge rectangular building is our food hub, which has a combination of a food bank and a community kitchen. So the opportunities will be for people to go out and pick fruit and veg, bring them into the community kitchen, cook it, and we'll have community freezers there. So that's kind of the whole site. And I wanted that slide up there in particular to show you that what I'm about to talk about is a very small, tiny bit of the site. And that in order for us to get the buildings, which was the passion for our community, we had to buy the whole site, and we had to show funders that we were going to use this site. And that site is now a working community garden, and we're about to start the larger projects of repairing the buildings. So this is our helter-skelter reception and welcome centre. And I have to admit, this is my fault, because in a darkened room one night after a couple of beers, oops, it's away again. There you go. We come up with this design, which is almost like a tower, which you'll be able to see from the entrance, and then to its right, you'll be able to see the actual mill tower. And it's more of an information and dissemination area rather than anywhere that you come in and purchase products and things like that. It's to give people access to the information about the site, about the various products that are available, fruit, veg, plants, hanging baskets, that sort of thing. And then you'll go out to a full decked area that we'll be able to host outdoor events, depending on the Scottish weather, under parasols, and be able to do exciting community events from that. Next slide, David, please. Oh, where is it? Next. Okay, so the next slide is going to talk about, when it comes up, is about the interpretation. There we go. The interpretation within the building itself. So the right-hand side, that circular thing, is the mill tower that used to be a windmill and then turned to steam and then turned to, oops, away again, doesn't matter. That's the second floor. So the first floor will be fully accessible. That's the bottom right next to the tower is a viewing platform that can be accessed either via that lift, which is that big X, or upstairs. And the important thing I want to get across, I guess, is that back to land and space, is that whilst it's been difficult and whilst it's been absolutely maddening sometimes to get the funding together to create the repair and the buildings and the physical stuff, what's been more important to funders is what we do in the spaces. So what that means is, what are we going to deliver once we've built these walls? And that's again back to that thing about the site, not just about buying the site, but using the site, using the space to generate informative, interactive, engaging processes. So it's not just about building a building, it's about using the space inside the building. So this is the ground floor. Next slide, please, David. And this is the second floor, which is again more interpretation area, and you've got the viewing platform, and inside that tower, all the mill machinery will be placed back in. Whoops. And that will allow people to actually see the mill working, and bags of flour going up and down, and the grinding stones working, again adding to that interpretation, but in a way that's accessible and engaging. And we'll have actors volunteers who will act as millers. We'll have school children being brought in to participate in a school day from 1890, when the place was built, 1900s, all the way through to modern day school. Again, just to start to encourage, engage, and increase the participation of our younger members in terms of this, because in terms of sustainability, that's what you have to do. You have to start looking at succession planning from the day one that you start looking at building or buying. So I guess that's a very quick tour, which some of my community have spent the last 40 to 45 years trying to put together. As Lisa has said, if you've got any questions, and I've got another slide will come up later about some of the learnings, I'm quite happy to discuss that.
Thank you so much, Bill. That's fantastic, and these drawings are really illustrative. Do you want to same question again? I think to you as we pose to Lucy. Do you want to summarise some of your key messages and learnings that you would want to pass on to other people who are thinking about exploring tackling vacant and derelict land in their area? Yeah,
David, could you put that last slide up for me, please? Thank you very much. I guess it's some of the key learnings that we've kind of learned from is think outside the box. And what I mean by that is that initially when we started this process, it was all about the buildings. But by thinking out and saying to particular funders, look, we want to buy the 1.2 acres of land, and we know there's buildings on it, and we know, and the community began to realise what we were trying to do was that if we bought the land, it wasn't as if we could take the buildings, lift them and put them somewhere else because we're not buying them. The funders realised that the buildings came with the land. They just didn't have any interest in it. So that's why a notional £1,000 was put onto them. But what it does is use the land, no matter how small, to justify other things that you might want to get from that. Talk to funders as early as you possibly can. They really are here to help you, but you need to give them some help. You need to translate some of your passion into language that they understand. So when they talk about outputs, outcomes, engagement, interpretation, all of that, they're not trying to trick you. They're just trying to get you to come to a position where you can explain to them in their language what it is you want to do. So take your language, translate it, get somebody to help you do that if necessary into their sort of language. And this is an obvious one, but involve your community as early as possible. Pretty obvious, but make sure you start to evidence that, and not just community surveys and things like that, but actually start fundraising, even if small amounts of fundraising, because what it does is it provides evidence that your community are involved in this, are engaged in this, and actually are willing to put some of their own money to this. Now, not everybody has to add to, they can donate in kind by volunteering times, and there's nothing wrong with monetarising your volunteer hours, because again, it shows evidence to funders that you're able to show your community is engaged in this. I spoke about this before, but think about what you're going to do inside the site and the buildings as well as the outside. It's important to funders that you're not just asking for money to purchase a building and to run a building. You have an idea about what you want to use that building for. And there's a great statement that we use all the time, is that our communities didn't want to just have the Carluke High Mill. They wanted to have and use it as a community resource. So start that from day one. And it's a bit flippant, but try to have as much fun as you can, because I'm telling you this much, it's as stressful and frustrating as heck, this process sometimes, is particularly when funders keep coming back and asking you the same question, what you think you've answered, and they just want you to answer it in a slightly different way. And you're talking multiple funders, which sometimes you have to do. It can be stressful and frustrating. So have as much fun as you can through this process. And don't be afraid to laugh at some of your mistakes and some of your errors, because you'll be able to look back on it and show and share those mistakes and hopefully stop other people from making the same sort of thing.
Well, thank you so much. That's a lovely note to close your key learning on, to try and have fun. And I think I'd like to bring David and Lucy back in now and invite David to start our question and answer session, please.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Lucy and Bill, for two great presentations, really quite inspiring. Got a couple of questions on the chat for you, Lucy, and maybe take them together. The first one is around the Croft and how you managed antisocial behaviour and who has access to the land. And then a follow-up was, do you actually have a lease on the Croft?
Yes, so we arranged a lease with the Croft, with the bowling club. We have a written lease, and we pay the money, and so that's all good. That rolls on year on year. It's only those people who have beds that have the code for access, but we make sure we put on public events throughout the year. So we've just had an event on a Saturday where there was tea and coffee and members of staff available, and people could come in. It was like a public open session, but we can't let the door can't be open all the time, because dogs would go in and children would go in, and we can't police that, because people are putting an awful lot of effort into learning to grow for the first time, and if their lettuces and courgettes were taken away, it would devalue the whole experience. But what we do to make sure it's fair is everyone has to come off the Croft at the end of the year. They have to leave their beds, and if they would like to apply for a Croft bed the following year, they can do. We have had a few people who've had a Croft bed a few years in a row, but people have to make that decision in February and March so that they will be applying. It's not something they can just assume. And in terms of antisocial behaviour, I mean, it's a long, slow fight. Obviously, when we first mended the fence, people still tried to get in, and we have had a few break-ins, but nothing serious. And really, what people wanted was they wanted a sheltered place to take drugs or have time to themselves, and that's why they were breaking in. They weren't really breaking in to do any damage to the beds or anything like that. They were just breaking in to find some space for themselves and get out of the rain. It's actually the general public that would do more damage to the Croft if they were allowed in with their dogs and their kids, really, because you know, the kids or the dogs would be in the Croft for maybe 5 minutes before they caught up with them. So because of the nature, you can just zoom in there kind of thing and can't be seen.
Sure.
So what we do is we change the code every year, and you can, if you want to get in the Croft, if you're determined to get in the Croft, you can climb over a hedge, but we've had less and less, and touch wood, in the last 2 to 3 years, none at all. So we expect there may be some in the future, but it's just something we keep on. We've got sheds where we lock things up, and we've got a shed for people who are on the site, the people who have the beds, and they have the code to that, and that's got hand tools and it's got low value stuff inside. And then we've got a different shed with higher value items that has a different code, which we don't give out. So we're very keen that everyone is able to succeed, and you know, it's a success, and people aren't, you know, given access to things that they don't need access to.
That's great. Thanks, Lucy. And I wonder if, just before we wrap up, a quick question for Bill. I was interested in the fact you said that maybe not always necessary to focus 100% on ownership, and that you can still do a lot with land and with communities. I wonder if you could just say a bit more on your experience of that.
You're muted, Bill.
I know. I might unmute myself, would be a good idea. And I noticed that some people had said that funders require a lease or ownership and things like that. But you can create some great partnerships. And we did with the private owner who was really interested in selling it. But we started the process with that individual from a point of view of him just allowing us access so that we could make improvements. So it was a letter of support from the owner, and we'd done some work on the buildings before to stabilize them. So we had almost like a precedent in that. So sometimes it's about just simply asking the owner a question, and would they be willing to do that? And as my granny used to say, if you don't ask, you don't get. Good old West of Scotland statement. And so we did. We asked the private owner, saying, look, we're talking to Scottish Land Fund about potentially purchasing, but what we want to do is we want to start our community's engagement in this process. And the easiest way to do that is to have something for them to visit. So we allow us to clear the land, and it was similar to Lucy's project, where it was full of poplars and small bushes, and there was no access to it. So we cleared that all away, and we got it to a stage where the people could start to come in and start to see where we could put together growing armies. So sometimes it's that thing about thinking out the box and not always assuming that the owner will want to give you a lease right away. And sometimes it's about having that conversation. Now, we were lucky. We kind of made a good case, and we'd worked, as I said, we set a precedent where we'd done some work on the buildings, but it's about projecting that positive thing about, if you let us do this, it'll make the funders more ready to give us the money to buy the whole site. So let us do this little bit of work so we can go back that we've got a joint partnership. So, but it's not always the case. And sometimes you just have to buy it, get a lease, as Lucy's done, and work from that. And it's interesting that around about antisocial behaviour, we've had this site now for 7 years, and we've had nothing. And it's the same sort of thing that Lucy was mentioning, is all our gates are open because it's a 1.2 acre site. There's no point trying to fence it off, because it wouldn't happen. But one of the things that we've found is a lot of our younger members of our community are coming in there at night as a safe place where they can get away from their parents and potentially just sit and have a drink, and very little drugs, but have certainly alcohol, and just basically get somewhere where they can just enjoy themselves without having to worry about getting chased off the sites. But it is that thing about, if you, and I'm sure Lucy agrees with this, is that it's that continual interaction, engagement with your communities to make them realise and take ownership of the site, to realise that people don't want to destroy things, they just want access to it, rather than going into, as I said, for 7 years we've not had any damage at all. Touch wood.
Great. Thanks, Bill, and Lucy. I'll hand over to Lisa now to wrap up the seminar.
Thank you. I'm just at this very moment launching our second poll, which is very similar to the first one. 4 questions, scroll through. I'm going to launch that and let that happen in the background while I say a huge thank you to Lucy and Bill for coming and talking so marvellously about their projects and what it takes to do this kind of work. So thank you so much, and thank you for everyone's questions in the chat and Q&A. What else do I want to flag before we end today? I just want to flag that we've got the second part of our vacant and derelict land, or tackling vacant and derelict land webinar pair in 2 weeks' time, and I'm going to drop the link to register for that into the chat in just a moment. And I'm also going to drop into the chat the Wakelet resource page for today's session. So let me just do those. So you've got the links for those before we go. Here we go. Can't talk and type at the same time. Many people can, but not me. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm just going to let that poll run out for a few more minutes. And yeah, the other thing I suppose I would like to pop into the chat is the contact details for our good practice team here at the Scottish Land Commission, because if you have a question around this issue, you want to talk to us directly, please do go ahead and get in touch with us, and if we can support you or signpost to the right people who can support you, of course we want to do that. Okay, I think we're nearly there with the poll. Nearly. I'm always waiting to see if it will get to 100%, which it has one time. All right, everyone, I'm gonna end that now and say thank you once again to Lucy and Bill, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time for the second part of this session. And yeah, have a lovely rest of the week, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thanks a lot.